Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today on a Saturday morning. I know how hard it gets, especially after a party like the one we had last night. I would like to start by giving you all a warm welcome and to welcome the audience online who are following us as we stand here. And I would like to give a warm felt thank you to Erna Burns and her team, to Trinity College London, for sponsoring my presence here. And very special thanks to my committee of friends, APIVA. I've been a member of the association for longer than I would like to admit. I remember starting as a vocal in the committee many, many years ago, then having the honor of being vice president when the first FAAPI conference was carried out in Buenos Aires, and then being invited to the second in 2001 in these premises, and now here, given the honor of my 6th plenary at a FAAPI conference. So thank you very much for your trust in me, and apologies to you all if you've attended plenaries by me before at the FAAPI conference, because there will be a couple of reiterations. The theory I will be using hasn't changed dramatically since my last plenary session, so you may find that a couple of slides are familiar. So apologies for that, but it's got to do with my intention to weave a consistent thread through all those sessions I've done in the past and am doing today. Given the bilingual nature of this conference, I thought I would start by making a reference to this wonderful, cruelly beautiful town, my hometown, where this conference is being held, Buenos Aires, la ciudad de la furia, as the song says. And I thought of quoting one of our beloved poets, but for those of you, and thank you very much to the guest speakers who are here and do not speak Spanish, don't worry, I'm going to be translating the poem in a minute. So I'd like to start with these lines. A mí se me hace cuento que empezó Buenos Aires. La juzgo tan eterna como el agua y el aire. This is Fundación Mítica de Buenos Aires, Jorge Luis Borges. Hard to believe Buenos Aires had any beginning. I feel it to be as eternal as air and water, in the translation of Alistair Reid. And why am I starting with this and with a picture of the area we are in, you may be wondering? Well, these are the final lines of the poem. Let me start from the beginning now. Y fue por este río, de sueñera y de barro, que las proas vinieron a fundarme la patria. Irían a los tumbos los barquitos pintados entre los camalotes de la corriente zaina. And was it along this torpid, muddy river that the prows came to found my native city? The little painted boats must have suffered the steep surf among the root clumps of the horse-brown current. Pensando bien la cosa, supondremos que el río era azulejo entonces, como oriundo del cielo, con su estrellita roja para marcar el sitio en que ayunó Juan Díaz y los indios comieron. Pondering well, let us suppose that the river was blue then, like an extension of the sky, with a small red star inset to mark the spot where Juan Díaz fasted and the Indians dined. Donde ayunó Juan Díaz y los indios comieron. Juan Díaz de Solís. And we are told that this man, okay, we don't get a red star indicating the place, but we do get a monument on the other side of the river in Uruguay. And we've got famous Uruguayans in the audience today. So there is a monument saying where Juan Díaz de Solís stood and discovered the River Plate. And we are told that he didn't make it, that he founded this city and it had to be refounded later, as you know, because he was killed, because he was eaten by the Indians. That's what we've heard. That's what we've learned at school. And what we learned is a discourse that opposes civilization and barbarity. I have no idea whether Juan Díaz de Solís was actually eaten by cannibals or not. We could blame the charrúas. After all, they are on the other side. But be that as it may, I want to use this story that I was told as a child and that Borges makes official in his poem. This idea that the European who intended to found this city was eaten up by the local inhabitants as a metaphor through this talk, and get back to it at the end of our talk to see if we can re-signify it, okay? So we're talking about a place where two groups of people, where two ethnic groups met. And I'm going to be using the term contact zone, which you saw in the title of the talk, to refer to this encounter, this meeting, the contact zone. And the term is not mine. I'm taking this from Mary Louise Pratt, who in this book, Imperialize Travel Writing and Transculturation, remember the word transculturation, please, we're going to get back to it. She defines the contact zone in the terms that you can see on screen. And for those of you who are more auditory than visual, let me read it aloud. The space in which peoples geographically and historically separated, the Spaniards, the Charruas, come into contact with each other and establish ongoing relations, usually involving conditions of coercion, radical inequality, and intractable conflict. Wow, how negative can this get? We're talking of coercion, inequality, conflict. Can that be avoided? Are we at all in a contact zone? And you may say, Claudia, the days of imperialism are over. Pause. I would like to quote from another writer I will be using, James Clifford, and I'm thanking Florencia Perduca sitting here on the first row, who first directed me to the reading of this book, and whom I know she quoted yesterday in her session. James Clifford, an anthropologist, not an ELT teacher. He writes about roots. Voila, the title of our conference is Roots and Roots. And this is what he says. He says that we are all today traveling cultures. And you may say, Claudia, I don't remember when was the last time I was able to catch a plane. It's become so expensive, or even a train. Well, but this is the way Clifford explains it. We are all, everyone, more or less, permanently in transit. Not so much where are you from, as where are you between, should be the question we should teach in lesson 1. Where are you between? And you may say, again, Claudia, I've been in my hometown for as long as I can remember. You may say that. My students will probably not have the possibility to travel. Why are you calling us a traveling culture? Well, I think the answer is very easy. We are traveling all the time. And when Clifford was writing this, he was not even aware of the existence of social media because they didn't exist yet. And yet he was saying, we are nomadic. We're going back to the days when people would move from place to place, where they would be in transition all the time. And this is what Zygmunt Bauman calls liquid mobility. We're all the time moving from one job to another, from one way of thinking to another, reconsidering the way we think, because something came up on Google that changed our minds. So this is the kind of learning many experts have been talking about in this conference. Ubiquitous, mobile learning. So how can we speak of a culture or an identity when we speak of learning that moves all the time? And we know that whenever we learn something, we change. So perhaps the word identity should no longer be used in the singular. We should speak of our identities, of our fluid identities in constant flow. And this is what Clifford is trying to tell us. He also uses another word, which I think is key for the topic I'm developing this morning, which is the word translation. He uses the word translation in the two meanings it has in English. In Spanish, we use two words, traducción, traslación. The earth moves around the sun, and we speak of a translation movement. So, he's using the term in both senses, moving from place to place and from one language to another. And what he says is that whenever we go online, whenever we encounter someone who's different from ourselves, we are translating. We are moving towards the other, trying to approach his or her position, but we are also explaining, translating, our own meanings. And don't tell me that doesn't happen at home when you quarrel with your partner or with your children and you're trying to make yourself understood in your mother tongue and you're trying to translate your meaning because they just don't get it. How often do you say, no, no, you don't get it, you don't understand, and you're still using your mother tongue very often? So this is the kind of translation that Clifford is talking about. How we express our multiple meanings, our multiple identities, how we move and how we translate in the sense of going from one language to another all the time. Okay so far? So, I could say that all speakers of foreign languages, especially all learners of foreign languages, inhabit Pratt's contact zone. We are always in contact with otherness, with those meanings that we are trying to understand and the meanings we want to express and find so hard to do. How often those of you, or everybody here seems to be bilingual, right? Many maybe plurilingual. How often do you find yourselves searching for words in your mother tongue because the concept comes up to you in whatever foreign languages you speak? So you're always in that contact zone of translation, of movement, and finding the words. So, to go back to the title of this conference, and to Clifford, we're exploring roots all the time, trying to go somewhere else, trying to reach the other. My question is, while we do this, can we also find our roots? Can we find who we are in this search for the other? So, my proposal today, as you must have seen in the abstract and in the title, is to deal with texts which illustrate encounters in the contact zone. And when I say encounters in the contact zone, then I don't necessarily mean imperialist movement in the 19th century. I don't mean tourism only. I may mean being online, being face-to-face, and encountering someone in my neighborhood, in my own home, in my classroom, whose way of thinking, whose worldview is so different from my own that I need to translate my own meanings and to find some intersection to make myself understood and try to understand the other, okay? That broad sense. So don't think of the exotic. Don't think that I need to go all the way to China or wherever you think to be in the contact zone. Let's think of the contact zone when we open the door of our classrooms and all this diversity, these different age groups, these digital natives, as Prenzi calls them, though I'm not too sure I like the term. Well, they are there and suddenly saying, find a way of reaching out, find the root and tell me what your roots are. These are the words that come up all the time in this kind of literature. Exile. You can read a lot of Argentine writers, unfortunately, who've written from exile. Diaspora, peoples who move from one place to another, starting with the Jewish concept of the word, but then today, how many people are refugees in so many countries because for lots of reasons, economic, political, they need to leave their places. Borders, a term that Florencia uses all the time, basing herself on originally the Chicano kind of reality in the South of America, of the United States, but then how often are we crossing all sorts of borders to such an extent that Flor speaks of border pedagogy. Culture clash. The culture clash we feel when our students say, oh no, you don't know how to handle that smartphone, give it to me. That's already a kind of culture clash, isn't it? So, are these texts useful to us in the language classroom at all? Texts that have to do with diaspora, with exile, with culture clash? And my answer is a big yes. Because language, which is what we teach, has a lot to do with identity. And I'm going to quote the Canadian researcher Bonnie Norton. Every time language learners speak, they're not only exchanging information with their interlocutors, they are organizing and reorganizing a sense of who they are and how they relate to the social world. They are, in other words, engaged in identity construction and negotiation. When I open my mouth, as Helen was telling us the other day, I'm giving a lot of information about who I am, but I have no clue how I'm being misunderstood. How can I project the identity I really want to project in a language that is not my own? So, I believe the texts from the contact zone, texts which illustrate this culture clash, this difference and this search for what we have in common, illustrate the central concern of foreign language education and translation as well, which according to Claire Cramsch is this: the problem of wanting to express one worldview through the language normally used to express another society's worldview. And very often we feel the clothes don't suit us, don't we? That they're not what we need at that moment. And I could anecdote forever on how I feel whenever I'm teaching in England or anywhere else in the world. And I so miss the possibility of using my mother tongue with my students when I really need it. No matter how bilingual I may feel, how plurilingual I may feel, there are moments when I miss the mother tongue. So, let me exemplify what I mean by this by referring to one text. The text is not a reader, it's not adapted for students, it's the sort of thing you may enjoy as constant learners of the language, or advanced students might like to read from, say, upper intermediate onwards, but if you pick up an extract and adapt it yourselves, intermediate level would be all right. This is Bali Rai, one of my favorite writers, normally known in the UK as a teenage writer, though I think the term is a bit too tight as a definition. Bali has written a number of texts which are fascinating to teenagers because they've got to do with their lives, but these are texts where cultures meet in the UK. So the first thing these books do is destroy the stereotype that everybody in the UK wears a bowler hat and is tall, blonde and blue-eyed. Okay? So it's all about the pluricultural nature of Britain. And Bali himself is of Pakistani origin. So he writes about what it means to live in England with a British passport, but belonging to a family who is non-white and non-British originally. And this is one of his latest publications. Just look at the cover and you'll see what I mean. Look at the title. How should I read that title? Should I say, what's your problem? Or, what's your problem? Or, what's your problem? And become suddenly a gangster in the street, somebody with a penknife. And if you look at the boy there, you can see he's non-white, he's at least dark-skinned, and you can tell a fight is coming. Well, it's a text about bullying. It's a text about having a shop, helping your father there, and suddenly getting skinheads coming into your shop and saying, what are you Pakis doing here? And knowing that your culture as a teenager and as someone with a British passport tells you to do certain things, and that your father disagrees completely because his culture, where he comes from, would do something else. How do you solve that clash? How do you do it without putting yourself at risk? How do you hide from your father that you didn't just fall, that somebody has been beating you consistently in class, and that's why you've got you're black and blue? So I'm giving you a text from Britain, written by a bicultural writer, if you like that term, whose family is Pakistani. They live in Leicester, they moved to Nottingham. Does this have anything to do with our students? Any bullying at school? Any discrimination at school? Any suffering on the part of our teenage children because their parents don't understand what they are trying to do, and they come and complain and they're sorry about the whole thing? So evidently, we can cross the borders of this text into our own borders and back. And that's why I believe bringing into class texts like this, texts from the contact zone, will allow us to reflect on our own contact zones. So back to theory, and I'm sorry, I know you told Christina in the survey that you don't like a lot of text, but here I'm talking literature. So I'm sorry, I'll have you reading text. And for those of you who like to listen, of course, I'm reading aloud. Apologies for those who are more visual and say, why are you reading what I can read? Anyway, what I've been dealing with is a different way of looking at our profession, as you know. We're talking about intercultural learners. I'm not talking about trying to get my students to be a sort of imitation native speaker, which they may never become. I'm talking about creating certain, not only skills, but dispositions, attitudes that have got to do with intercultural awareness. And this is the way John Corbett, I don't know if he's still at the conference, he was here. Hi John, thank you for coming. John Corbett, who's always my bibliography, and the other day I was doing a webinar and he was there at the webinar and he said, come and meet the bibliography. So there's the bibliography in the audience again. And John defines the intercultural learner in these terms. He's one who is linguistically adept, although not native speaker proficient. So, ladies and gentlemen, he's not telling us stop teaching the present perfect. We should still do it. We need to get our students to be linguistically adept. I'm not taking that job away from your hands, okay? But on top of that, John says, our learner has the skills which enable him or her to identify cultural norms and values that are often implicit in the language and behavior of the groups he or she meets, and who can articulate and negotiate a position with respect to those norms and values. So noticing that the text tells me something that's different from what I would have done, but I need to take a position. And that position should be a respectful one. No matter how much I agree or disagree, no matter how much I can say, right, I'm reading what they do, but I don't want to change my ways. How can I not only live with that difference, but enjoy it? Wow. If I had the answer to that, we would all be in the United Nations today. But maybe in our little corner of the classroom, as we always say, we can make a small contribution and see how many we are. What a huge contribution we can make. So, sorry, apologies to our non-Spanish speakers. I will be quoting from national documents, and I do not have a translation for this. But it's just to show you how our national documents back up exactly this conception. Look at the núcleos de aprendizajes prioritarios de lenguas extranjeras that Leonor Corradi mentioned in the panel the other day. Los núcleos de aprendizajes prioritarios de lenguas extranjeras privilegian tanto el saber de y sobre las lenguas y el lenguaje, como la formación de ciudadanos y ciudadanas respetuosos de las diferencias lingüísticas y culturales. We're talking about the same concept. It's behind our jobs in whatever we do in Argentina. It's the document that regulates our jobs. And if we want to get more local, diseño curricular de lenguas extranjeras de la ciudad de Buenos Aires, where we are today. Look, it speaks about reflexión intercultural, apuntar a desarrollar la percepción y el respeto, the word I was using before, respect, por las diferencias culturales, sociales, religiosas, raciales, entre otras, que van surgiendo en la clase de lengua extranjera a partir del contraste con lo propio. So when I compare and contrast, it's an opportunity to reflect upon myself and question and reaffirm my identity. Provincia de Buenos Aires, which APIBA also represents. Diseño curricular de lenguas extranjeras, Provincia de Buenos Aires. It's subdivided, as you know, into different levels. So arbitrarily, I've taken segundo ciclo primaria. I could have taken any other. And it speaks about the following. Enseñarle inglés al niño es brindarle oportunidades para interactuar con textos o personas de otras culturas y así enriquecer su mirada del mundo, su entorno sociocultural, su lugar en dicho contexto, fortaleciendo su propia identidad. You see, it's a yin and yang sort of thing. It's I'm looking at the other, it speaks about mirada, gaze, but I'm also looking into myself. I'm finding my roots. I'm questioning and reconsidering and rebuilding my own roots with double O. And if you've heard me speak before, you may have heard me speak about this story, which I think exemplifies beautifully what the diseño curricular is all about. A story by the Nigerian writer who was executed by the dictatorship in November 1995, Ken Saro-Wiwa. The story, simply called Robert and the Dog, is a story about a servant who serves a master who's a medical doctor. We don't know, Saro-Wiwa never tells us, whether the doctor is black or white. We tend to think he's white because we see him in a master's position. Whenever I read the story with African students, they tell me he's black. A member of a black elite in his own country. So you see how our gaze is already conditioned by our context. And I would like to read a short extract from the story, which is already very short. It's a double-sided page. He feels so happy working for this doctor, but one day things change, as they do in stories. The only source of worry in the new situation was the dog. For the young lady, the master's new wife, had arrived with a dog from Europe called Bingo. And Robert watched with absolute amazement and great incredulity as the lady spoke tenderly to the dog. She ensured that he was well fed with tinned food and milk and meat and bones, and she held the dog lovingly in her arms, brushed his hair, and tended him carefully. The dog appeared as important to the lady as her husband, and indeed, Robert thought, in the order of things, the dog was more important than himself. If you have pets, maybe you say, oh, that's me. Or maybe you say, isn't that a bit too much? I don't know. Let's move on. He could understand a stray, mangy dog with flies around its ears being beaten and chased away from the dwellings of men. He could understand a dog wandering around rubbish heaps in search of sustenance. But a dog who drank good tinned milk was entirely beyond his comprehension. On one occasion, the lady took the dog to a doctor, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I'm going to torture you and leave you here, and I do exactly the same in my class. I always leave them there and say, ah, the bell is gone. And now you'll have to find out for me what happened later. And they come up with the most gory versions of the story. What will Robert do to and with that dog? You know what it's like when we feel jealous. Now, you might say, Claudia, this is Nigeria. And this is a bit of a stereotype of Africa, the poor people of Nigeria working as servants. Any coincidences with your context? With the people in your classrooms, if you don't teach in a socially privileged school? Maybe they are the ones who are used to seeing dogs like the dogs that Robert describes. Maybe they find it obscene to see the little dogs in my neighborhood that look like little girls with ribbons. And we might say, but we love our pets. And the others say, yeah, but we love our children and they don't have enough food. So we are talking about a social contact zone here. And I told you this was Nigeria. Could have been anywhere else. And this is what really gets your students responding. So what can I do with this story? Well, I can move on the next class and read the following. All that day, Robert felt his stomach turn. And when he got home in the evening and saw his children with distended stomachs gamboling in the filth that simmered in a swollen stream at his door, and watched them hungrily swallow small balls of eba, he asked himself, who born dog? And you may say, Claudia, that's ungrammatical. I teach my students all the time who was born a dog. But what I'm showing you is the English of an African with little education. And maybe this makes our students feel that they're not the only ones who make that mistake naturally. We're talking about different Englishes here in the plural. And all of a sudden, he developed a pathological hatred for Bingo, the dog, his master's dog. All night long, he saw in the eye of his mind the dog cuddled in the warmth of the city, which he would have to clean and brush in the morning. And he asked himself, again and again, who born dog? Well, I won't tell you the end, except for the last sentence. The sentence is, standing on its own, and the dog died. What did Robert do to the dog? What did he do with the food that his master left in the house when he went on holiday? He said, Robert, could you look after the dog? He lost his job, of course. Did he lose anything else? What did his wife say when he went back with the tinned milk and food and said, I've left my job? Well, Sarah Weaver never tells us. And this is an invitation to explore the contact zone in ELT. We can develop intercultural awareness. How much does this context have in common with ours? Contact with otherness allows us to reflect, as we were saying, on the self. Language awareness. What about that word eba, which is not, or iba, I have no idea how you pronounce it in whatever African language it is. It's not explained, it's not glossed. What's the effect? I know it's food. What sort of food is that? Do I need to look it up, or can I recover meaning from context? Cross-curricular links. the geography teacher may be teaching Africa and the reality of Africa and the changes in the map of Africa. How about bringing this story into the ELT classroom for content and language integrated learning, or at least cross-curricular links? And then there's an identity investment. The minute I ask my students to respond to this text from their own perspective, from their own context. And so what do? I intervene the text. I tamper with it. I change it. I call it, following Rob Pope, textual intervention. Some ideas, things I've carried out with this text, and you probably saw me do that in previous sessions. Change the point of view. Tell me the story from the point of view of the master when he comes back and finds the dead dog. Tell me the story from the point of view of the wife. Find out how much of a voice this wife has. And there's a lot of prejudice in this. They tell me, oh, African women, like that in general, have no voice. I say, how would you like it if you were told Latin American women don't have a voice like that? Or even Argentine women, or even Porteño women. Oh, well, not quite. So awareness of how we generalize, how we stereotype, because of what the media in particular tell us about Africa, what Amanda Adichie calls having a single story of Africa. What would have happened if? What would have happened if the master hadn't gone on holiday? Would have happened if Robert had talked to them about what he felt, etc., etc. Explore those possibilities. Transfer to another media, get them to role play, get them to film, get them to illustrate, make a cartoon, a blog, whatever. Or transfer to our context. If Robert was Roberto and he lived around the corner, how would the story change or not? And change the ending as we would like to do in life and cannot. So, we've been exploring textual intervention, and we've also been exploring a kind of English, at least one line, that is not standard English. So these world Englishes, I believe, should also be part of our classrooms. I know, you might say, I don't want them to imitate that. They won't pass their exams. Right. But you do want them to understand when someone with an Indian accent answers the phone in a call center, don't you? Or when they have to do business with the Chinese, for example, or with the Germans, for that matter, and they can't speak German or Chinese, and they will use English as a lingua franca. So what I'm proposing is something you probably do all the time, which is to encourage written or oral responses to texts from the contact zone, where a variety of cultures that express themselves in English find their way of expressing meaning. Do you know this guy? Well, he visited Argentina on 4 occasions. The British Council carried out wonderful sessions with him. Beatriz Pena-Lima wrote great materials on his work that you can still find online. And Benjamin Zephaniah is perhaps one of the wonderful doors into secondary school poetry to deal with secondary school students who are probably reluctant to deal with poetry, and bring varieties of English into our classroom. Because as you can see, though he's British, he doesn't look it. He is of Jamaican origin, a poet, a Rastafarian, I was saying, a poet, a performance poet. And I'm going to show you a little extract from a very well-known poem that you've probably used in the classroom. Talking Turkeys. Be nice to your turkeys this Christmas, because turkeys just want to have fun. Turkeys are cool, turkeys are wicked, and every turkey has a mum. Be nice to your turkeys this Christmas. Don't eat it. Keep it alive. It could be your mate and not on your plate. Say, yo, turkey, I'm on your side. Something interesting about the spelling, I guess. You can see how he's trying to reproduce his Anglo-Jamaican accent, which you shall hear in a minute if everything works. But not only that, he's talking about a culture that, at least in Argentina, is not very common. Vegetarianism, or even more, veganism. It's becoming more widespread, isn't it? But we tend to consider veganism a sort of sin in our context, because we adore the cow, okay? And yet we kill it. We don't do it as in India. So maybe this is a good opportunity, not only to bring a different variety of English into the classroom and a poem that's fun, but to talk, yes, of course, about Christmas, about festivals, about what we eat for Christmas, what they eat in other parts of the world. And I always remember using this poem with a group of Muslim students in Britain, and they said, Christmas, how do you celebrate Christmas? When is it? Why do you do it? And you go, huh, I took it for granted that they would know. Well, how much do we know about their celebrations? So contact zone again, in just one word. Find out about countries that do not generally celebrate Christmas, and that opens up a whole world. Second stanza. I got lots of friends who are turkeys, and all of them fear Christmas time. They want to enjoy it. They say humans destroyed it, and humans are out of their mind. Yeah, I got lots of friends who are turkeys. They all have a right to a life, not to be caged up and genetically made up by a farmer and his wife. And he will be telling you, as usual here, that Christmas is no longer Christ's Mass, but a commercial bonanza. So how many interesting topics in terms of values can you find in this poem, plus a different variety of English? So enough from me. Listen to Benjamin performing this live at the Hay Festival.
I really have to go now, so this is my last poem. I'm sitting there thinking, what do I do, what do I do? Somebody asked me for a request earlier.
Sorry.
As I was saying, and I think I've got to do that. We're in May now, yeah? June tomorrow, is that right? Great. Let me take this opportunity to wish you a very Merry Christmas. Be nice to your turkeys this Christmas. Because turkeys just want to have fun. Turkeys are cool and turkeys are wicked. And every turkey has a mum. Be nice to your turkeys this Christmas. Don't eat it, keep it alive. It could be your mate and not on your plate. Say, yo turkey, I'm on your side. I've got lots of friends who are turkeys. And all of them fear Christmas time. They say, Benj, hey Benj, man, chop. I want to enjoy it, man. It's a Jamaican turkey. But those humans have destroyed it, man. And those humans are out of their mind. Yes, I've got lots of friends who are turkeys, and all have the right to a life. Not to be caged up and genetically made up by a farmer and his wife. No. Turkeys just want to play reggae. Sorry. Turkeys just want to hip-hop. Have you ever seen a nice young turkey saying, hey man, I cannot wait for the chop? Turkeys would like to get presents. Turkeys want to watch Christmas TV. Turkeys have brains and turkeys feel pain in many ways like you and me. I once knew a turkey. His name was Turkey. He said, Benji, explain to me, please, who put the turkey in Christmas? And what happens to Christmas trees? I said, I'm not too sure, Turkey, but it's got nothing to do with Christmas. No, humans get greedy and waste more than need be, and businessmen make lots of cash. So, be nice to your turkeys this Christmas. Invite them indoors for some greens. Let them eat cake. And let them partake in a plate of organic grown beans. They love it. Be nice to your turkeys this Christmas and spare them the cut of the knife. Join Turkeys United and they'll be delighted and you will make new friends for life. Good night. And peace to peace. Thank you.
All right, you may say, how difficult. I couldn't take this into the classroom. They won't be able to follow. If you Google Benjamin Zephaniah talking turkeys primary, you'll find a slow, smiley version for primary school children. And I think I've included the reference in my article, which is online anyway. So, how much awareness of different varieties of English we can bring into the classroom simply with this fun bit. Different ways of celebrating Christmas, different kinds of food, veganism, all that can empower students to respond to the video and to the poem by expressing their own meanings, their own Christmases, their own favorite food, their own way of eating, etc., etc. It's all, after all, about finding the words. Because I've been asking you to encourage your students to respond. But do they have the means? Do they have the words to tell somebody from abroad what mate is and how you make it and what it means and why we pass it on from hand to hand and from mouth to mouth? Do we have the words? And probably we don't, because we hardly ever stop to give them the words and the paraphrasing strategies that they need to explain that for which there is no translation. Don't your students ask you all the time, how do you say milanesa? Been there? And the point is, well, you don't. You explain what it is, and let's find the words together. And I believe the texts from the contact zone allow us to do that, because they're all the time glossing. They're all the time explaining meanings that are foreign to us. And one of the most difficult things for travelers who visit our country is to explain the Pampas. Well, maybe not any longer, because after all, you Google the Pampas and you see them, Google images. But the 19th century visitors, travelers, settlers were really in trouble to try and explain what it meant to see the horizon 360 degrees around you. An impossible idea for somebody in Europe. And how did they explain what the Pampas are? They used a comparison. Something which the British knew only too well, the sea. So British travelers who visited Argentina, and I've done research into 110 texts and I followed the image, all of them speak about the Pampas as a sea of grass. Metaphor, simile, can be a wonderful, succinct way of expressing our meanings in a foreign language. We don't need to get to be advanced in English to be able to say, it's like the sea. And that's what I'm advocating. Using texts not only about the others, about Nigeria, about Pakistan, about Jamaica, but texts in English about ourselves. And here's where I will reiterate some of the things I said in Tucumán, where I spoke about Anglo-Argentine literature. And I will quote William Shand. William Shand migrated from Britain into the American continent, chose Buenos Aires as his place of residence, stayed here all his life, wrote plays and stories in Spanish, but poetry in English. For poetry, he needed his mother tongue. And Borges, back to him, considers William Shand one of the finest poems of the American continent. And this is what he writes. The Pampa is never ending. Towns, mountains, rivers, hills, oceans, jungles become inconceivable. Sky and Pampa urge a questioning of your structures, a revision of the values you considered infallible, stress the vacuity of failing yesterdays. You look at yourself and wonder what you are. Deranged in that treeless plain, the past is cancelled out, but now is not the present. Time there is devoid of logic. And you look at this and say, really? You take it so much for granted. It's what you see as you drive, out of Buenos Aires, 10 minutes later. We take our landscape for granted as well. Whereas these people are making an effort to explain how a landscape feels. What a lovely excuse to bring literature into the classroom, to empower our students to get those words, to get those strategies. Well, where do I get world literatures in English or Englishes about Argentina? Last year in San Martín de los Andes, I gave everybody a surprise, and if you were there, you may remember. A local inhabitant, Janet Dickinson, invited me to tea because I was looking for the texts of her father, Barney Dickinson, one of the founders of San Martín de los Andes, Chapelco, who had written stories in English about those days as a founder of a town and as a developer of a resort. And she invited me to tea, gave me photocopies of the manuscripts. You can imagine I was shaking when I held them. And she told me, well, here's my novel. She's Argentinian. She lives in San Martín de los Andes. She writes in English. And the novel is this, Sisters of Silence, where twins are separated when they are very little, and they are Anglo-Argentine, One grows up as an Anglo, the other one grows up as an Argentine. What happens the day they meet? And then the book of short stories, Out of Patagonia, which I bought in that lovely shop called Patalibro. And these short stories about San Martín de los Andes in English. What a wonderful opportunity to see how others see us, or how a local inhabitant uses English to express our own meanings. Susan Wilkinson. Susan Wilkinson was with me on stage in my plenary session last year in San Martín de los Andes, and her novel, Sebastian's Pride, has been part of my syllabus for years and years and years. A novel that tells you about Provincia de Buenos Aires, that speaks about Rosas, about Lavalle, about what it meant to get land in those years. She wrote it on the basis of her great-grandfather's diary. He came on the Mimosa, which is another book she has recently published. The Mimosa is the boat that brought the Welsh community to Patagonia. And he wrote about the Irish community in Provincia de Buenos Aires. When she showed the Irish community, members of the Irish community, her manuscript, they were very angry. They didn't want her to speak about how their ancestors, some of their ancestors, had got the land from Rosas. So she made Sebastian English. And the Irish community were very happy. And they helped her, you know, spread the word about her book. That in itself, that anecdote which she told in my class, speaks volumes about our history, about what we want to say and what we want to silence, like the Sisters of Silence. So you've already got quite a few titles to go and get. But if you're worried about more titles, and above all, if you're worrying by now about your students who are not at upper intermediate level or advanced level, my little contribution is this poor webpage. Apologies, it's been dormant for quite a long time. I hope to be able to get back to it in the summer. I do it in my free time. But if you go to the tab which reads intercultural activities, you will find there my illustrated adaptation of the story of the Welsh when they encountered the Tehuelche in Patagonia. You will find activities for elementary level secondary schools, not many, but quite a few examples, which I hope will inspire you to develop your own materials, to make your own choices. So it's myname.net, very easy, and in any case, it's in my article in the selections. And I want to round off with a text you can get tomorrow for free on the web, because it's no more than the blurb of a book. A book that makes many of us angry. It's called Bad Times in Buenos Aires. And this is the blurb. Look at the way the publisher tries to sell this book, published in the 80s, on Amazon. In 1993, sorry, in the 90s, not in the 80s, 1993, Miranda France moved to South America, drawn to Buenos Aires as the intellectual hub of the continent, with its wealth of writers and its romantic, passionate, and tragic history. She found that it was all these things, but it was also a terrible place to live. Wow. The inhabitants of Buenos Aires are famously unhappy. All over South America, they are known for their arrogance, their fixation of Europe, and their moodiness. Very soon, Miranda France encounters bronca, the simmering and barely controllable rage that is a staple feature of life in the Argentinian capital. She finds that bronca has deep roots. The violence and racism of the first European settlers, the dictatorships, especially in the 1970s, when so many disappeared. Even Evita Perón, for there was no rage to rival Evitas. Right. If I asked you to respond to this, we could spend the whole day here. I love to work on texts like these with my students, where they cannot remain neutral. And look at the collection of stereotypes you've got here. How true are they? And if I ask this question to a porteño, I'll get one answer. If I ask a question to those of you who come from other parts of the country or the continent, I get another answer. For example, the other day we worked all class on arrogance. Wow. There must be some truth in it? Hopefully not. Well, as Chimamanda says, the problem with stereotypes is not that they're not true, it's that they are incomplete. But when a stereotype hurts you, then you learn how much you hurt when you stereotype others. So I think this is a fantastic text to work on that. Too difficult, adapt it a little. But a word like arrogance, come on, it's transparent in Spanish. So adapt a few words and you get a text to work on stereotypes in class. And on top of that, you even have an explanation of bronca. How about challenging your students to find their way of explaining bronca, viveza criolla, those aspects of our nature that make us both sad and glad. And if you go to Google Books, you can sample the text. And it's going to be very, very interesting, because if you just get this sample, you will say, oh my God, this woman had a terrible time here, so why did she stay? But then you notice that she's being very ironic. And irony is another cultural issue. We hardly ever pick up British irony the way we should, and we need to develop awareness of that. We can get easily offended with the text, which ends up in a very tender way of looking at the people she met in Buenos Aires. So read on. We found lexical items, we found definitions and paraphrasing strategies to express our own identities in English. And this is, colleagues, what I think should form a crucial part of our classes. So, to summarize, texts which illustrate encounters in the contact zone, I believe, can be provocative starting points for reflection on otherness, but also on what we have in common as human beings with the rest of our fellow human becomings. To encourage intercultural understanding and respectful attitudes towards difference. If it hurts, then don't hurt others the same way. Allow critical consideration of stereotypes. Defamiliarize cultural features which may have been naturalized. What does this mean? We take certain things for granted. They are natural. The pampa is natural. Well, let's defamiliarize it. Let's see how others look at ourselves. Oh, to see ourselves as others see us. And last but not least, it can help students find the words to express their own worldview, no matter how many mistakes they make. I started with Solís and the charrúas. 2 years ago in Tucumán, I mentioned this picture, this encounter in the contact zone, when Captain Fitzroy, on board the Beagle, brought Charles Darwin to find pantheological samples in Patagonia. And you can see the meeting. You can see the European boat. You can see the canoe of the Yaganes. And I asked my students, what did they say? And we know what the Europeans said. Charles Darwin wrote a diary. We still read The Voyage of the Beagle. And Fitzroy wrote a logbook of 2 volumes. And what they said was that the 3 people they took to Britain to re-educate told them in good English that they were cannibals. We're going back to Solís, y los indios comieron. Did they? Well, the fear of cannibalism is pervasive in the literature of the conquest of America, of Africa, of Australia. Again, there may have been some truth in it, but a lot of it was fear. Fear of being metaphorically eaten up by a culture that they couldn't understand. So guns were good to impose the new discourse, a discourse of property, of fences, etc. We often read The Voyage of the Beagle. Why not read it side by side with Esteban Lucas Bridges' Uttermost Part of the Earth? Esteban, the second white person to be born in Ushuaia, the son of Thomas Bridges, who wrote the Yagan English Dictionary, says, Darwin thought the Yaganes spoke 100 words. My father, in his dictionary, has 32,000, and he could have continued working on it. So, the danger is that we often read, in history books especially, a single story, quoting Chimamanda Adichie again, and we naturalize stereotypes. We take it for granted who is primitive, who is civilized, and this provokes language death. Who speaks Yagan today? Where are the Yaganes? And identity loss. Let's make sure, colleagues, that when we teach a foreign language, especially the foreign language of the net, the language of international communication, we preserve and build identity. We preserve and build languages and interlanguages. So let's design materials and tasks to focus on hybridity, mestizaje, transculturation, the way our cultures weave a web together rather than only meeting each other and then separating. So let's avoid those preconceptions, and let's defend plurilingualism rather than linguistic cannibalism. Thank you very much. Goodbye to the people online.